maybe we'll do something useful.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Brussels Forum. My name is Anne McGinn. I'm the press secretary of the German Marshall Fund in Washington. As you can hear from some of the activity in the hall, we are getting close to dinner, so I'm going to get started right away with questions. I want to thank the gentleman from the panel on Iran for joining us this evening. We do have microphones that will pass around, so I ask that you identify yourself and your affiliation when I call on you. And we'll start with Frederick in the back.
Thank you. Well, as you said, Iranian nuclear program is a very slow process. And my question is, which is the critical step Israel won't let Iran go through?
Just state to whom are you addressing the question? We have four.
Oh.
So again, so what was the gist of your question? What is the point of no return by which Israel will not enable this program to move forward? As I've said in the panel, right now there is, I would say, clear guidelines that were basically agreed upon as we see it. And I'm not speaking officially. I'm not an official on behalf of the Israeli government. But the analysis of the summit between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu entails four major elements. One is there will be no containment of an Iranian nuclear capability, military capability. Two, all options are on the table, including military option. Three, Israel has the full right to defend itself. And four, a window of opportunity needs to be given now to the diplomatic arena. And how to test and at which, what is the moment by which Israel says this doesn't work and we're in a risky situation whereby we will take action is nothing that we can really analyze because it depends on a lot of elements that none of us are really well informed about. And it also depends on the understandings between the security establishments of Israel and the United States. But one thing I can say clearly, that there is a coherent policy at this stage, I would say for the very near future, which says we'll give the sanctions and the international effort a try, but we will not enable an Iranian nuclear program, military nuclear program to be completed. And that is agreed by the United States, Europe, and also, in my mind, by Israel.
Please identify yourself and give your name.
Sorry, Jens Postrup from the Danish newspaper Politiken. A question for Ambassador Burns. You stressed the crucial importance of having India, China, and Russia to participate in the sanctions. In your assessment, what is holding them back? And should and could the European Union and the US address those issues, be it access to oil, financial compensation, or regime change?
Thank you very much. And I wouldn't, I understand your question. I wouldn't group the three of them together. I think the Indian policy is quite separate from Russia and China. And there I think the frustration, at least that I have, is that India has not acted with alacrity to reduce its oil imports from Iran. And as I said there, if you look at the, and there were articles about this in the New York Times this morning, I assume in the Washington Post, another great American newspaper, that China and South Korea and Japan have all reduced their energy imports in a very significant way. Now, maybe China because of pricing issues, but still it's happening. So we would look for, I would hope that India would step up. On China and Russia, I would assume that if negotiations were held, and if they were serious, and if they took weeks or months, I think you might see that the Perm 5 would congeal, would come together. Because it's my sense that the Russian government does not want Iran to become a nuclear weapons power. I think that's a sincere wish of the Russian government. They may have been concerned in the past about the motives of the Europeans or the Americans, but I think President Obama has gone a long way to address any of those concerns because he's consistently stood up for diplomacy since the day he was inaugurated. So that's why I think trying negotiations is so important. They could fail, but they also might reveal a strengthening on the P5 side, and who knows what we'll hear from the Iranians. It's worth a try.
Should we do something to get them on board?
The Russians and Chinese? We know they signed up to the Security Council sanctions resolutions. There's 4 of them. They're Chapter 7. Chapter 7 means you must abide by them if you're a UN General Assembly member. So Russia and China must abide. Again, my sense is that Russia has had a far more sophisticated strategy than the Chinese on this issue. And I think China is the single greatest impediment right now in trying to establish a united international front of pressure. And again, the reason for sanctions is simple and direct: to coerce, force Iran, persuade them to go to the negotiating table. This is part of diplomacy, the sanctions, not part of a war strategy. And if China would realize that, if they would support the sanctions, that's the best way to ensure a non-military solution, in my judgment, to this conflict.
We'll go down the road. Next, please identify yourself.
Thank you. My name is Ralf Bosen from Deutsche Welle, international broadcaster from Germany. I want to address my question to Mr. Herzog. You said don't trust the Iranians when they say they don't want to have a bomb. Sure. But on the other hand, my question is quite naive. What makes Israel so sure if they have a bomb, they're going to use it against them?
We have read the speeches of the Supreme Leader and of President Ahmadinejad, where he says, of course, that Israel needs to be wiped off the map, where he denies the Holocaust, where he spreads terror all over the world constantly, including in very strange type attacks on the Saudi embassy in Washington, the events that we've had recently in Bangkok, and attacks on Israeli diplomats in Bombay and so forth and so on, or in Delhi, sorry, and couple it with a clear ideology, a school of thought, that is the school of thought which is the predominant school of thought in the Iranian leadership, which is a very extreme streak of Islam which doesn't accept really any other religion. Couple it with an investment of billions of dollars in an Iranian nuclear program whereby Iran is one of the biggest suppliers of a source of energy to the world, and in a way doesn't really need it when its economic situation is not doing well at all. Couple it with a ballistic missile capability, which one asks himself why, and understanding the innate concept of an Iranian empire, and therefore I don't say that the moment they have a bomb, they will send it on Israel. But it clearly is what one would term existential threat. And it's not only existential threat to Israel, it's a dramatic change in the region which can suck in moderate Arab nations who are more prone to the two-state solution, or more prone to peace with Israel, or more prone to cooperation with Western countries and the United States and Europe and so forth, losing them totally to the extremist control, to an Iranian control, and finally couple it with a huge proliferation race for nuclear armament in the Middle East, and that is a huge danger to the world. So all the odds are clear here, very clear. There cannot be an Iranian military nuclear capability, and we welcome President Obama's clear declaration that there will be no acceptance of containment, and that it's a vital US security interest, and in my mind, European security interest, that they do not complete their nuclear capability militarily.
May I address this if it's okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right. There is no need for an automatic assumption that Iran would use this bomb against Israel. I think I understand perfectly the logic and the consequence of things as outlined by Minister Herzog. And I could see the visceral fear that this would cause for some people who are interested in the welfare and the existence of their state. However, from where I stand, there's an alternate explanation for the behavior of the Iranians that probably has nothing to do with hitting Israel, which would be, right at the outset, the Islamic leadership, starting with Khomeini, have declared their animosity for Israel and their adoption of the Palestinian cause. It could fit in logically with their strategic views of their future in the Middle East and the role they play in the Middle East as a potential hegemon, which is what the Shah and others have failed to do, to create tremendous soft power immediately, instantly, to speak to the hearts and the minds of the Arab people who are not Shiites about Palestine and Israel. And I would say that they have gotten a lot of mileage out of that. And they continue to get that up till the last year and a half. And they still have the Palestine card to play. It probably more to their mind, it's a Palestine card. And it is for regional control. It's something to think about, so not to assume automatically. The other thing that I would say is that a lot of Palestinians would die if Iran uses that.
Ambassador Burns mentioned, sorry, it's Lawrence Norman of Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal. Ambassador Burns mentioned two numbers that a lot of people are talking about. He said 6 to 12 months. I don't know if that was definitive, but you said talks, let's see where they go in 6 to 12 months. I wondered if that is the definitive, acceptable time period in your mind, and I'm very interested to know if Mr. Herzog and the others would agree. And very briefly, since we are in Brussels, what do you need from Europe in this process?
The important thing to know about me is that I do not speak for the U.S. government, and I retired from the State Department 4 years ago, next month. So those remarks are mine, they're private. I'm a private citizen. I think there's time, and that 6 to 12 months was just a guess, but my sense is that there's more time than that there's no need for a military strike in 2012 by anybody. And if we open this diplomatic window, we've got to have the patience to stick with it. I mean, think how long it took Mandela and de Klerk to negotiate an end to apartheid, 4 years. It may take a while. Now, as I said before, we also can't let them run out the clock. And so there's some center there that you've got to be aware of. But I see no reason why any clock should determine a military strike this year. My assumption, and I'm just reading the statements of the IAEA here, is that there's more time than that. Secondly, the Europeans have been absolutely stalwart over the last several years. And I must say, that when President Sarkozy came into power, and I was Undersecretary of State at the time, he made a critical difference. His tough-minded attitude on this problem really strengthened the United States and the EU3 as we negotiated with the Russians and Chinese on the sanctions resolutions. I think Prime Minister Cameron has been equally tough, and the German leadership as well. But I think France has been a leader here, and a really good leader. And we'll need that French leadership in the months ahead.
If you allow one comment on the issue of the calendar, just a comment for the understanding. Experts are often criticized because there are intelligence estimates being leaked years ago, or comments saying 2012 and now it's been pushed further and so on. I think, and this is because I'm outside government that I can say that, there are several other factors that come in. I mean, the covert war that has been ongoing, cyber, sabotage, assassination, has probably had some significant effect. I'm in no position to assess that, but it does make a difference if the general assumption is that there has been significant delays on the Iranian program. So I think it's part also of this debate to factor that in, and the same applies to sanction, to take something that is far more visible, that it has created technical problems and delays and so on. So we're gaining time through other means as well.
Robert Marquand, Christian Science Monitor. My question is for Mr. Burns, who's leaving. So.
I do think that we're going to have to wrap this up because we do have dinner. Do you have a quick question for the gentleman up here? Yeah. We have a microphone coming to you. Quickly, though, please. Thank you.
My name is Mas. I work for African newspapers. I apologize for my English is not very good because I am coming from French country. Firstly, it is an observation. I see the discussion are mainly focused on Europe, on Iran, Arab Spring, Russia, Iran, Syria. I think it will be very interesting to open your forum to African experts, African panelists, because Africa is it is very important in the world. It is just an observation. The question is, how do you see the relation between China and Africa? In the past, Europe and United States have leadership in Africa, but now the most of African countries develop so many relations in a lot of areas, in trade, in energy, etc. How do you analyze this phenomenon? Thank you.
I would just say a sentence. First of all, we are not the organizers of this conference. We're guests like you. And you have made a very valid point. Africa is awakening on all fronts. And Israel had a huge interest in Africa and still has, and was always deemed as a nation that helped many African economies grow on the issues of water desalination, agriculture, solar energy, and so forth. And the issue, for example, of the Nile water distribution, which is now on the table, is something that ought to interest the world at large. So I concur with your comment, and we all know from Israel perspective that really the Chinese economy is very strong in Africa. We meet Israeli companies who work a lot with Chinese companies in Africa, know that China has become a very major element in Africa. I don't know what the vision of Europe is on this, perhaps. Those who control Africa can say something about it.
Certainly don't control Africa. One quick comment. Indeed, China is playing an increasing role in all over Africa, and this is fascinating. Having said this, I would be very happy if China was as interested in governance as in natural resources in Africa. And I'll stop there.
One last question for the lady in the second row.
Anna Videnska from the EU Reporter. I have two short questions. First, about the Kazakhstan initiative to create a nuclear fuel bank to engage Iran, how you would estimate it. And the second, that Georgia has already for 1 year free visa regime with Iran. So what kind of influence do you think has this measure? So that's all.
On Kazakhstan, on the other matter, we can discuss it in details, but I'm not really an expert on that. On Kazakhstan, I mean, it's one of those initiatives that make sense, that prove that multinational fuel banks can offer a solution, and that if Iran is not at ease with their fuel being recycled in France because they don't trust the French, there are other options that are on the table and that could probably be more on more neutral ground and could satisfy them. So I think these examples or options should really be there when we go into the nitty-gritty of the debate, if we ever get there, and I certainly hope we will.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. So where's the